I heat my home primarily with firewood, and I've been getting really tired of splitting it with a maul and an axe, and I finally broke down and bought a good splitter. The SuperSplit answered all of my needs, even more than my needs. I could run a business with this thing, but all I do is use it to split wood for myself. Yeah, it was a very pricey log splitter, but you know, when you're used to really fine tools and investing in the best tools, it made a lot of sense. And since I started using it, I've had nothing but fun with this thing. So sometimes the amount of money that you invest in a tool ends up equaling joy when you're working. And boy, I like nothing more than having a really good time when I'm working, especially when I'm splitting firewood. This thing's dependent on a little 5-horse motor. I could have gotten an electric one, but I run this thing around my property, and sometimes I'm here, sometimes I'm over at my woodshed. And I also wanted something that had a little bit more power so I could run through big knots and oak and locust and stuff like that. But it's a little 5-horse motor, so it doesn't put out a lot of noise. It's really quiet, but it has plenty of power to run right through some of the biggest, knottiest hardwood I can imagine. And it starts and runs very easily. All I gotta do is turn this ignition switch on, make sure the fuel is on, put the choke on if it's been cold. Starts right up, almost the first time every time. It's a soft piece of alder. Pretty good sized piece of oak. If it doesn't go through the first time, flip it over, and give it another whack. I don't usually cut stuff this big. Oh, this ain't oak. This is maple. Box, as it's coming through, runs out of power, just pull it back, run it again. Let those flywheels come up to speed, and it'll run right through it. One of the things you got to be careful of, you don't want to end up with little slivers and stuff on this bed here. Because if you do, they'll get jammed underneath the ram, and the ram will get stuck part way along on its travel, and it's a real bear to get it unstuck. Trust me, I figured that out the hard way. I think this one might be oak. Yeah, it is. You can see that oak grain right there. As or not. One more time. There we go. There's that oak grain. You can see it. Little medullary rays and some of that. It's pretty oak. But it's got a lot of pith in the center of the core of the tree. It's really soft, so you can see it in here. Even spalt it a little bit and getting to rot. Can't mill it into lumber. May as well burn it. Notice I'm putting a pointy end right up against the splitter here, against the wedge. That way, actually I'm following the instructions, that way the ram hits the square end and it'll split it. It won't knock it askew. You can see how sweet this thing is. It does. It really makes splitting firewood a piece of cake and a lot of fun. It's a joy. I'll take this case off once I get it back near my woodshed and show you those flywheels and show you the mechanics on how this whole thing works. And assembling it and putting it together was a piece of cake too, because this company, I'm telling you, everything but the motor is made in America, and every single hole, every single bolt was exactly fit perfectly every single time. I wasn't missing even one little lock washer. Everything was there. The instructions were super simple. I heat my shop with firewood, and I get my Blaze King started with shavings from my lathe, a little bit of paper, and some kindling. There's some Doug fir kindling. And I've got a little propane torch that I start that with. That Blaze King, at least this one in my shop, is real easy to get started. The one in the house, which I'm going to do a different video on. It's a little bit more difficult, but this one, I just stuff it full of wood. Then I hit it with a torch. Make sure the combustor is back. It's not engaged. Make sure I got the intake air open all the way. And then I leave that door ajar right on the latch so it sucks in as much makeup air as possible. And in a few minutes, it'll just be almost shaking because it'll be burning so good. And then I'll start shutting it down. But that's how easy it is. I don't like leaving stuff on top of it because I'm in a wood shop. So I make sure there's no combustible material anywhere near this stove. For the last probably 12 years, I've been cutting all my firewood and splitting it by hand. And I got tired of that. I wanted to get a log splitter, and I wanted to get one that was fun to use. I got a SuperSplit from a company out in Boston. It's made in America, except for the Honda engine. And I just love this thing. It makes splitting firewood absolutely a joy. But it's not your usual hydraulic splitter. I did a lot of research before I bought it because I wanted to make sure that whatever I bought was going to last, was going to be easy to use, easy to maintain, and was going to be kind of quiet and work efficiently and quickly. And I really like what they did with this kinetic splitter. First, I'm going to loosen up this case. I don't have to pull these out all the way because this shroud here just slips on. To pull the shroud off, you have to also remove the actuator handle. But it's pretty easy. just that one nut, handle comes up, flips out of your way. On the other side, I got to pull off the belt cover, which is right here. And then you just loosen these two. And the belt cover slips right off. There are two more nuts you have to loosen right on the bottom of the shroud. And there's one over on this side too. And once everything's loose, you just take the shroud and pick it right off. And now you can see these flywheels. On a kinetic log splitter, unlike a hydraulic log splitter, this little motor back here that's really quiet is all it takes to drive these flywheels and get them up to momentum. They're so heavy that when you pull the release lever, when you pull the actuator lever, it fires the ram, and all of the energy built up in these heavy flywheels is driven into that ram, right into the log, and splits it. So it actually operates very quickly and quietly and efficiently. It's really based on a really old principle of flywheel engines like those old hit and miss steam engines. But here we've just got a little Honda engine that's just a beauty to use. This is one heavy duty machine, and it's pretty heavy too. When they shipped it to me on a pallet, it came in, I think it was like 620 pounds. I'm not sure if they come always assembled as much as mine was. I believe they probably do. The instructions that came said I had to assemble the axle and the wheels and the whole 9 yards. But my axle and everything were already pre-assembled. All I had to do was pretty much put the outfeed table, that support table on. I had to put the tongue on for the hitch. I had to mount the motor. And I had to mount the pulley, obviously, and adjust all of that. Let me show you how I did that in just a second. But it was super simple to assemble. And probably the primary reason it was so easy to assemble was because it was engineered perfectly. Every single one of the mounting holes lined up perfectly. Every single one of the bolts and the washers and the lock washers were there where I needed them. I wasn't missing one thing, and there wasn't one bolt or washer extra. I mean, these people really spent some time making sure that the product they send out to us is ready to go. There are no hiccups with this machine. And that's one of the things I was looking for when I explored log splitters. Yeah, I spent more money on this than probably most people would, but I spent a lot more money on my table saw and my routers and my band saws and my lathe and everything. I mean, sometimes the machinery that you buy is an investment, not just in longevity and how it pays you back. It's an investment in how much enjoyment you get out of it. I learned that lesson a long time ago. Now let me show you how easy it is to mount the motor, to adjust the belts on the drive, and to get your log splitter running real quick. So mounting this little motor is a piece of cake. They really got this worked out perfectly. This plate comes pre-mounted to the bottom of the motor, and it's got these little Allen screws that come out the bottom of it. And when you set this on this beam, it perfectly centers the plate and the motor. Then, when you do set it on the beam, you kind of set it in at an angle so that this adjustment rod can pass right through this mount right here that's on the beam. And that's the rod that you use to adjust the tension on the belt. Once you've got the motor mounted to the beam, don't start tightening up the tension rod. Just leave that loose for a minute and get this strap lined up and mounted. There are two long bolts that go through the bottom of the strap that secure the motor to the beam. Get that so it's just not quite snug. It's a little bit loose, but it's there. And then you can start tightening up these adjustment knobs after you put your belts on. It's really easy to get the tension correct on this belt. You just want it so that you can push it up and down, maybe a ½ an inch total, and that'll give you just the right amount of tension to drive these flywheels. Once you've got that, you can tighten up these two nuts, then tighten up these two bolts, and you're good to go. It's that simple. If you're not that familiar with gas motors, this is the perfect little baby to start with. It's got an ignition switch in the back here, on, off, so you can just kill it real quick. Make sure that you turn that on though before you start pulling on this cord to start it, or it will not start. It's got a little throttle right here. That's how you speed it up or slow it down. There's a little icon here of a turtle and a rabbit. They're pretty common. You see it on most gas motors. And then right over here, there's the gray thing. That's your choke. You're going to always want to turn the choke on. And there's a little diagram right here that shows you the choke is kind of closed when you first start the motor when it's cold. And there's a fuel shutoff too. That's really easy to get to. It's just a little lever. When you store it, shut that fuel off so it doesn't flood the motor. And then when you start it, make sure you turn that little lever all the way off the other side so you got a good flow of fuel going. And that's all there is to it. So reassembling this is almost as easy as taking it apart. Just make sure you take these, slip them right behind the washers. Once you've got the shroud, slip behind the washers on both sides. Snug those up a little bit with your finger, and then make sure that you've got these bolts slid right into this little notch so you can tighten that up too. And once everything's in place, you can snug it all down. And then on this side, make sure you slip on this belt guard before you tighten up the two bolts right here. And then the last thing you have to do is take that actuator handle down. It'll slip right over that bolt. Put your nylock nut on top of it and tighten that up. Now when you run this down, don't tighten it snug right on top of that arm, on top of that handle. You want a little bit of slap there, a little bit of wiggle room, so as you lift this up, it slides back and forth inside of the notch. And you'll figure that out real quick. And there's one other thing I want to show you. You can pull the ram out by your hand. It just slides right back in. And if you lift up the actuator, you know, when the motor's not running, it'll lock that ram in place. And there's a little bearing right back here. It's a little lift bearing. Keeps the actuator right off the beam here, just a hair off the beam so it doesn't hang up on it. You want to make sure that you always clean this beam off real good, because if you leave any slivers on it, when this ram comes out, these slivers can get driven right underneath the ram and get jammed in there, and that can jam the whole ram onto the beam. And if that happens, it's really hard to get it loose. You may even have to loosen up these bolts to get that sliver out of there. So keep this clean. And once this is out like this, let me pull it out a little further. Now you can see this lift bearing back here. This is really important too. You want to keep that lubricated. I spray it with a little silicone spray. Some people use WD-40. I kind of feel like WD-40 attracts dirt a little bit. And it really doesn't keep it lubricated as long as a really good silicone lube. But that has to stay lubricated or that bearing will wear. And then before long, you'll end up with the thing dragging on the beam. And that'll take energy out of the flywheel. Other than that little bit of maintenance, and the typical maintenance that you got to apply to the gas engine and stuff, that's about all there is to it. The thing runs like a champ.